My mom is a military pilot, he said it with pride, with his chest lifted, like someone finally sharing a beautiful secret they've been waiting to tell. But what he got in return wasn't what he expected. There were no smiles, no curiosity, just something quick, cruel, and loud. Most people think they know what's possible. They think they know where everyone belongs, especially when it comes to a woman, and even more when it comes to a black woman. But sometimes all it takes is one simple sentence, spoken from the heart, to shake those beliefs. And when truth meets courage, something powerful happens. What he lived through that day wasn't just embarrassment. It was a test, the kind only life knows how to give, and not everyone is ready to witness. But he saw it. And what came next, no one there would ever forget. Dave walked through the school gates with that tight feeling in his chest, the kind only a new kid knows. The entrance looked bigger than it needed to be, and the loud buzz of running, shouting kids only made everything more overwhelming. He held his mom's hand a little longer than usual, squeezing it like it was the last sip of courage, before jumping into something unknown. It was just his first day, but for Dave, it felt like the start of a whole new world. The classroom was a blur of voices, open notebooks, and kids who already seemed to know each other inside out. Some were swapping stickers, others arguing about who was the fastest on the soccer field. A few were racing to finish yesterday's homework before the teacher showed up. The walls were covered with colorful posters about kindness, respect, and inclusion. Nice words, but not always followed in real life. The class was lively, smart, and just a bit competitive. Dave slipped into a seat at the back, trying to hide behind his backpack. He was 8 years old, a black boy with sharp eyes and quiet hands. He didn't talk much, but his thoughts moved fast. He didn't know anyone yet, but one thing he did carry with him was a deep, silent pride in his mom. To him, she was the definition of strength. And even though he hadn't said a word about her, that feeling gave him a quiet kind of power. He watched everything around, him with care, the kids, the laughter, the way they talked, still getting used to the faces and the sounds. And even if he felt a little out of place, deep down, he knew this new school had something waiting for him. What he didn't know was that a simple classroom assignment would soon test that pride and open the first door to something much bigger. The teacher walked in with a warm smile and didn't waste a second. She wrote the assignment on the board in big letters. Write about what your parents do. The classroom lit up. Whispers and giggles broke out instantly as kids started swapping ideas before even grabbing their notebooks. Dave looked around, a little nervous, but quietly excited. He didn't know these kids yet, but this was his chance to talk about something he held close to his heart. One by one, the students stood and shared. My dad's a dentist. He fixes people's teeth. My mom owns a beauty store, said another, beaming with pride. There were kids of doctors, store owners, teachers. Each story got its share of chatter, comments, laughter, even a bit of competition, as if having the coolest parent was its own kind of trophy. Meanwhile, Dave held his folded paper close. He had drawn a helicopter at the top, colored it carefully with crayons. He had taken his time with every word. The essay wasn't long, but it was full of truth. When his turn came, his heart beat faster, almost like the sound of those rotors he loved to imagine in his mom's stories. He stood up slowly, gripped the page gently between his fingers, and said, with a quiet fire in his eyes, My mom is a military pilot. The room froze. For a second, it felt like no one even breathed. Dave gave a small smile. But that smile was heavy with pride. And before he could say another word, something in the air began to shift. For a second, nothing. Total silence. The kind that presses down on you thick and strange, like the room itself didn't know how to react. Dave stood there, paper in hand, heart racing. Maybe he expected curiosity. Maybe someone would ask a question, smile, even cheer a little. But that's not what happened. What came next was the kind of sound that no child should have to hear when telling the truth. Laughter, big, loud, and cruel. At first it was a snicker, quiet, from the back. Someone trying to hold it in. Then it spread, a wave of giggles, then chuckles, and soon half the class was laughing out loud, pointing, grinning, whispering like it was the funniest lie they'd ever heard. Military pilot? One kid repeated, cracking up. A woman? A black woman? Man, that's like something from a cartoon. Another chimed in. You made that up. Come on. Just say the truth. The teacher stood up, tried to settle the noise. But by then, the laughter had taken over the room like a storm no one could stop. Dave didn't move. His eyes, just moments ago so bright, began to dim, like someone had blown out the flame he carried so carefully. He didn't understand. Why would telling something so real, so full of pride, turn into this? In that moment, the weight of their judgment was heavier than his backpack. What should have been a moment of pride turned into a moment of humiliation. A black child standing in front of a laughing classroom, not because he told a joke, but because he dared to speak about someone they refused to believe could exist. And that hurts in a way that's hard to explain. Dave was still standing, but he felt smaller. The paper shook in his hands. His eyes searched the room, looking for someplace safe to land. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it stuck. His face burned, hot like sunlight had poured straight into his skin. And in the middle of all that laughter he felt completely alone. Not because no one was around, but because no one there seemed willing to truly hear what he had just said. The teacher finally stood. She walked to the front, clapped her hands sharply and said, "That's enough. Let's respect each other's work." The room quieted, gradually. But then, in a comment meant to calm things down, but cutting like a blade, she added, "Well, everyone's allowed to dream, right? Now let's focus on realistic professions, please." Dave froze. Even in trying to defend him, she'd just confirmed what they all believed. A few more kids laughed, this time behind their hands. The teacher hadn't realized it, but she had just reinforced the very disbelief that had crushed his moment. Dave walked back to his seat slowly. The paper he had held so carefully was now folded, tightly, like he was trying to protect what was left of his dignity. He stared out the window and wondered, would it always be like this? Would every mention of his mom require him to brace for disbelief? He wasn't ashamed of her, not even a little. In fact, he loved her even more in that moment. But something had shifted. It was like they had tried to take away his right to be proud. And the worst part? They almost succeeded. The light in his eyes, the one that used to glow just from thinking about his mom flying above the clouds, was now shadowed over. Because sometimes prejudice doesn't scream. It whispers. And even then, it leaves deep marks on a child's heart. The recess bell rang like nothing had happened. But inside Dave's chest, everything had changed. While the other kids ran toward the playground, he stood still for a moment, looking down, almost like he was waiting for someone to call his name. But no one did. No one even glanced back. It was as if, on top of being doubted, he'd become invisible, and for a child, being ignored like that hurts more than words ever could. He walked slowly to a quiet corner of the yard, near a patch of overgrown weeds, by the fence that no one cared about. There, away from the shouting and the games, he sat down. He picked up a small rock and started drawing on the dirt. Rotor blades, helicopters, little shapes from the sky he knew so well from memory. In that silence, he was trying to reconnect with the part of himself they'd tried to erase, the pride he felt in who he was, and more than anything, in who his mother was. He thought about the stories she used to tell him before bed, about flying between mountains, rescuing people in dangerous places, facing storms head-on. She always said that being a pilot wasn't just about flying a machine. It was about having the courage to go where most people wouldn't dare. To Dave, his mom had always been a kind of superhero. But now, in this school, it felt like no one else believed that with him. And still, he believed, even with his heart aching. Even after being humiliated, he held on to those stories like a rope in a storm. Because deep down, he knew his mother's truth didn't fit inside that classroom. It was bigger, wider, free. And maybe one day, the whole world would see what he had always seen. But for now, sitting in that lonely corner, all he wanted was a little peace, and a place where he could keep dreaming, without being judged for it. The house smelled like warm food and comfort. The soft sound of rice simmering in the pot blended with the clinking of a spoon against the pan. Dave walked in quietly, dropping his backpack in the corner, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His mom, still in uniform, sat at the table with her elbows resting on the surface and a glass of water in her hand. She looked at him with that kind of gaze that sees more than just a face. "Something happened today, baby?" she asked, her voice calm, the kind that knows how to wait. Dave didn't answer right away. He stood there for a moment, eyes on the floor, scratching at his wrist, trying to find the kind of words that didn't hurt too much when spoken out loud. After a few seconds, he walked over and sat beside her. He spoke softly, like his story might crack if he said it too loud. He told her everything: the essay, the laughter, what the teacher said, and when he got to the part where they said she was made up, his voice caught. He couldn't finish, but she didn't need him to. She already knew. She reached out, took his hand, held it tight, with both strength and tenderness. She didn't rush to teach him a lesson. She didn't pretend it didn't hurt. She just stayed there, with him, present. Then, after a silence that said more than any speech could, she looked into his eyes and said, "We don't have to prove anything to anyone, but sometimes life proves it for us." And she smiled. Not the kind of smile that ignores the pain, but the kind that carries 1,000 untold stories and keeps going anyway. Dave took a deep breath and rested his head on her shoulder. In that quiet hug, he felt a strength that no amount of laughter could take away, because sometimes all a child needs is to be reminded where they come from, and that their place in the world doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. He didn't say another word after that, but deep inside, something had been reignited, and quietly, life had already started setting up a surprise that would change everything. The next day felt ordinary. The sun was soft, the sky a little cloudy, hallways buzzed with noisy footsteps and playful voices. Out in the schoolyard, the class was gathered in groups, practicing for a presentation later that week. There were laughs, off-key singing, and clumsy dance moves filling the air. Dave was there too, quieter than usual but still present. He moved through the motions just enough to blend in. But inside, he was still carrying the weight of what had happened. He repeated the dance steps without much energy, just trying not to stand out again. Every now and then his eyes drifted up to the sky, searching the clouds like they might have something to say back. Nobody had brought up the essay since, but that silence was almost as heavy as the laughter had been. Things looked normal again, but for Dave, nothing really was. And then, right in the middle of practice, something new cut through the noise. A strange sound. Low, rumbling, growing louder, coming from above. One by one, the kids stopped moving and tilted their heads toward the sky. The sound felt like it was slicing through the air. Deeper than an airplane, more alive than thunder. It was strong, steady, unmistakable. Dave's eyes widened. He knew that sound. From far away. By heart. By soul. It was the same sound that filled his imagination when his mom told her stories. Rotor blades. Military. Close. Certain. It was her. His heart began racing before anyone else even realized what was happening. While the rest of the class looked around, confused, Dave already knew. He stood frozen, eyes locked on the sky, waiting. It was as if time had slowed down just for him to feel every single second, because right then, something deep inside him whispered, clear and certain. Now, they'll see. The helicopter appeared from behind the trees, descending slowly. Calm, powerful, with the precision of someone who knows exactly where to land. The sound grew louder, making the leaves tremble and every eye lock onto the sky. The kids who, moments before, were lost in their dance routine, were now wide-eyed. Some had their hands over their mouths, others bounced in place, filled with excitement. The school principal rushed out of the building, walkie-talkie in hand, clearly caught off guard by whatever was happening. The helicopter touched down on the field next to the school, kicking up dust and sending small shockwaves through the ground. The military insignia on the side made one thing clear. This was no game, no show. This was real. Then came the sound, a clean metallic clack as the door opened, and out stepped a figure. Strong, composed, unshaken. She wore a perfectly fitted uniform, her posture upright and unbothered. The helmet covered part of her face, but even through that you could tell she was black, beautiful. Commanding, her skin glowed under the sunlight. Her presence carried the weight of someone who walks with purpose. She moved with steady steps, like someone who had faced harder landings in far tougher places. There was a grace in her stride that didn't need to be taught. It came from everything she had already lived. Her braids were neatly tied beneath the base of the helmet. Her stance was firm, her gaze calm behind mirrored sunglasses. A black woman in full command, stepping into a place where many had once said she didn't belong. And with each step forward, she quietly shattered decades of doubt. Dave stood frozen in the middle of the yard, his heart pounding in sync with the fading rotor blades. Everything he had tried to explain with words was now unfolding in front of them, clear as day. She didn't need to say anything for them to understand. His mom was a military pilot, a woman, black, real. And in that field in front of everyone who had laughed, she didn't just land a helicopter. She landed the truth that no one could deny anymore. The rotor blades were still turning, slowly, lazily, as she began to walk forward. Each of her steps echoed in the minds of the same kids who had laughed so easily just the day before. No one spoke. No one moved. It was like the entire world had paused, just to let this moment unfold. The children stared, wide-eyed, as if they were only now realizing they were witnessing something rare and unforgettable. She walked toward the edge of the schoolyard, removing her helmet with a calm, practiced motion. Her braids were neat and tight beneath it, her skin glowing in the sun, her eyes strong, observant. She took off her sunglasses, slowly revealing a softness behind the focus. Some teachers stepped out of their classrooms, staring with open mouths. Even the one who had dismissed Dave's words the day before, the one who spoke of real jobs, seemed unsure where to look or what to do with her hands. The silence around them was absolute. Dave's mother stood before the class. She looked each student in the eye, offering a small, steady smile, the kind of smile that didn't need to prove anything, but spoke volumes all the same. Without saying a single word, she did something that no lecture could ever achieve. She had everyone's full attention, and it wasn't fear. It was respect. Something real. For the first time, those who had laughed were truly listening. Dave watched it all unfold with a lump in his throat, but pride swelling in his chest like never before. That woman, that pilot, was his mom. And in that moment, she wasn't just a pilot. not just a soldier. She was everything they'd said didn't exist. She was living proof that the impossible only feels impossible until it lands right in front of you. And that silence said more than 1,000 speeches ever could. The teacher, clearly moved, stepped forward toward Dave's mom, her steps slow, almost reverent. She swallowed hard before speaking, and for the first time that day her voice was soft, unsure. "Would you like to say a few words to the class?" she asked, her eyes holding both regret and admiration. Dave's mom gave a small nod, smiling gently, then turned to face the students, like someone about to tell a story that needed to be heard. "I'm a military pilot," she began, her voice steady but warm. "And it wasn't easy to get here. There were people who laughed at me, doors that stayed closed. There was prejudice, judgment, but there was also courage, persistence, love, and most of all, someone at home who believed in me every single day." She turned, her gaze to Dave. And this time, he didn't look away. The students were completely still. Some looked serious, others visibly ashamed. There was a new kind of silence now, not the silence of shock, but of learning, of awakening, of respect. One boy slowly raised his hand. "Is it scary to fly a helicopter?" he asked, his voice small but honest. She smiled. "Being scared is part of it. But what you do with that fear, that's what makes the difference." Dave smiled too. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but one that says, "I belong here. I'm proud. I'm seen." For the first time since he arrived, Dave didn't feel out of place at school. He felt grounded, confident, whole. And as more kids started to approach, asking questions, making comments, genuinely curious about her, Dave held his mom's hand tight. Because now he knew. Sometimes, truth flies higher than any laugh born out of ignorance. Have you ever stopped to think how many truths get dismissed every single day? Just because they come from the wrong voice, the wrong color, the wrong kind of person? How many kids have held back their pride, silent, afraid to share something beautiful, because they didn't want to be laughed at? Dave's story isn't just about courage. It's about how badly we need to look again at how we listen to each other. What if it were your child, your daughter, your son? What would you do if you watched their light dim because of someone else's ignorance? Stories like this shouldn't be rare, and they definitely shouldn't be shocking, but they still are, because the equality we preach isn't always the equality we practice. If this story moved something in you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to prove something was real, something that mattered deeply to you, just because no one else believed it? Let's talk about it. This space is for that, for truth, for healing, for growing together. And if you want more stories that inspire, that stir your heart, that make you reflect on who we are and what we stand for, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come with us on this journey. Because here, truth always finds a place to land.